Samantha Walker always dreamed of a life beyond the quiet suburbs where she lived with her husband, Daniel. She had married young, falling for his kindness and stability, but deep down, she always wanted more: glamour, attention, the thrill of the high life. While Daniel worked tirelessly as an accountant to provide her with a comfortable home, Samantha scrolled through social media, envying the models, influencers, and celebrities who lived the life she craved. Her friends from her youth had moved on, some achieving fame, others finding their way into the industry. Samantha felt stuck, her beauty wasted in the mundane routine of a modest marriage. When an old acquaintance from high school, Melissa, reached out, Samantha found herself drawn into a world she had only dreamed of: glitzy parties, expensive dresses, and influential people. Melissa introduced her to a photographer named Vincent Morrow, a man known for his work with rising models. Vincent saw potential in Samantha, or so he claimed. Flattered by his attention and promises of modeling gigs, Samantha began to spend more time in the city, lying to Daniel about her whereabouts. She justified it as networking, telling herself that this was her chance to finally break free from the dull life she had settled for. The first night she attended one of Melissa's parties, Samantha felt an intoxicating thrill. The music was loud, the people beautiful, and the atmosphere electric with opportunity. She sipped expensive champagne, listening to stories of glamorous lives, luxurious vacations, and high-end fashion brands. For the first time in years, she felt alive, desired, important. As the weeks passed, her lies to Daniel grew more intricate. She told him she had taken up a part-time job to keep busy, something in the city, something vague. Daniel, always trusting, never questioned her, merely happy that she seemed happier. He had no idea that his wife was slipping away from him. One party, one flirtation, one secret at a time. One afternoon, Vincent invited Samantha to a private photo shoot at his studio. She arrived in a simple dress, but he had other ideas. He handed her an outfit, something bold, revealing, nothing like the modest clothes she usually wore. Hesitant at first, she eventually gave in, intoxicated by his charm and the thrill of the moment. When she saw the final photographs, she barely recognized herself. She looked powerful, glamorous, almost famous, and she wanted more. The more time she spent in Vincent's world, the more distant she became from Daniel. She began to look down on their quiet life, their simple home, the routine she once found comforting. Daniel's loving gestures, bringing home her favorite coffee, rubbing her feet after a long day, felt insignificant compared to the attention she received in the city. She resented him for being content while she yearned for something more. Then came the night Vincent introduced her to Marco Leclerc. Unlike Vincent, who was playful and charming, Marco was intense, exuding power and wealth. He took an immediate interest in Samantha, making her feel like she was on the cusp of something big. "You have the look of someone who could go far," he told her, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "But you have to be willing to do what it takes." Samantha didn't know what he meant, not entirely, but the idea of success was too alluring to ignore. She laughed at his jokes, let his hand linger on her waist a little longer than it should, and convinced herself that she was simply networking. But deep down, she knew she was stepping onto a dangerous path, one that could lead her anywhere or leave her with nothing. As the night ended, she found herself standing outside her home, staring at the warm glow of the living room window where Daniel sat, waiting for her. She hesitated before going inside, a storm of emotions brewing within her. Could she really leave behind the life she had built for a chance at the life she always wanted? Or was she already too far gone to turn back? Samantha's deception grew deeper as she balanced the life she shared with Daniel and the seductive world of high society that beckoned her. What had started as occasional nights out with Melissa had become an obsession. She spent her days planning her next trip to the city, her next party, her next photo shoot. The adrenaline rush of being seen, admired, and desired outweighed any sense of guilt she may have felt. Daniel, ever the devoted husband, remained unaware of the depths of Samantha's transformation. He noticed the changes: new clothes, bolder makeup, a newfound confidence, but he assumed she was simply embracing a new hobby. "You seem happier lately," he told her one evening, as she prepared for another night out. "I'm glad." She forced a smile, feeling a twinge of guilt. But guilt was a luxury she couldn't afford if she wanted to reach the top. Her relationship with Vincent became more than professional. They shared intimate moments behind the camera, stolen touches, lingering glances. He fueled her ambition, telling her she was meant for greatness, and Samantha soaked in every word. Yet, she knew Vincent was not a man who offered love, only opportunities. Marco, on the other hand, was different. He had taken an even greater interest in Samantha. His gifts became more extravagant: designer dresses, lavish dinners, invitations to exclusive events. Unlike Vincent, Marco did not disguise his intentions. "You belong with people like us," he whispered one night, his hand possessively on her thigh. "You were never meant for that small life you live." Samantha didn't resist. The temptation was too strong. But the deeper she fell into Marco's world, the more reckless she became. She started missing dinner with Daniel, forgetting their anniversaries, leaving his texts unanswered. When he asked if everything was all right, she assured him she was just busy. "It's nothing," she lied. "Just work." Daniel trusted her, and that trust was the very thing that made her deception easier. As weeks turned into months, Samantha reached a point of no return. She wasn't just attending parties, she was living for them. She wasn't just posing for the camera, she was reveling in it. She wasn't just lying to Daniel, she was leaving him behind, one night at a time. But in the world she had chosen, loyalty was a fleeting thing. And Samantha would soon learn that the people who raised her up could just as easily let her fall. Samantha's rise into the world of high fashion and luxury came at a price she hadn't anticipated. The glamour she had chased so desperately began to show its cracks. Marco, who once showered her with gifts and compliments, became possessive, controlling. His affection came with expectations, unspoken at first, but soon impossible to ignore. She found herself in situations she never imagined, where saying no wasn't an option. Photo shoots became more risque, the parties darker, the men more dangerous. Marco's interest in her was no longer just about her beauty. It was about power, control. He introduced her to people who saw her as an object, a commodity rather than a person. The deeper she waded into this world, the more she realized she had lost herself. The girl who once felt guilty about lying to her husband was now someone else entirely. And Daniel, sweet, devoted Daniel, was slipping further away, oblivious to the woman his wife had become. But Samantha would soon realize that in the game she was playing, there were no winners. And once Marco was done with her, she'd be left with nothing. Samantha's perfect illusion began to crumble. Marco, once her greatest benefactor, became cruel, unpredictable. The promises he had made to her of a grand future in the industry faded, replaced by commands and ultimatums. At first, she tried to convince herself that this was normal, that every woman in the industry had to make sacrifices. But the sacrifices Marco demanded weren't just about her career. They were about her body, her autonomy, her dignity. The lavish gifts stopped coming. The invitations to elite events became fewer and far between. Marco no longer paraded her around like a prized possession. Instead, he treated her like an afterthought, calling on her only when he needed entertainment or company for his powerful friends. When she tried to protest, his words were cold and dismissive. "Do you really think you made it here on your own?" he sneered one evening, his grip tightening around her wrist. "Without me, you're just another pretty face that nobody cares about." Samantha swallowed the lump in her throat, realizing with growing dread that he was right. The people she once thought were her friends, Melissa, Vincent, the socialites who had praised her beauty, had begun to distance themselves. She was no longer new and exciting. In their world, she was already fading. Just another woman Marco had picked up and would soon discard. As her influence waned, so did the glamour of her new life. The luxurious penthouse Marco had once let her stay in was no longer hers. She was downgraded to a small apartment in a less desirable part of the city. She found herself attending lower-tier events, rubbing shoulders with women she once would have dismissed as desperate. The realization hit her hard. She was becoming one of them. She still tried to salvage what was left of her dream. She clung to Vincent, begging him for more photo shoots, more connections. But even he had lost interest. "I can't sell an image that people don't want anymore," he told her bluntly. "You had your moments, Samantha. It's time to face reality." Reality was cruel. The phone calls stopped. The compliments dried up. Marco's attention was now on someone younger, fresher, someone who hadn't yet learned what it felt like to be discarded. Desperate, Samantha started reaching out to old contacts, trying to book modeling jobs, trying to find someone, anyone, who would still see her as valuable. But the industry had already moved on. The doors that had once been wide open were now slammed shut in her face. And then came the worst humiliation of all. Marco cut her off completely. With nowhere else to turn, Samantha found herself thinking about Daniel. She had all but abandoned him, neglecting his calls, making up excuses when he asked to see her. She had convinced herself that he was beneath her, that she was destined for something greater. Now, standing outside their old home, she realized that she had thrown away the only thing in her life that was real. But when she knocked on the door, it wasn't Daniel who answered. A woman stood there, pretty, kind-looking, the sort of woman Samantha used to be. Before she could say a word, Daniel appeared behind her, his face a mixture of shock and something else, something harder than she remembered. "Samantha," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. I need to talk to you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel exchanged a glance with the woman before stepping outside. He closed the door behind him, arms crossed, waiting. "I made a mistake," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought I wanted something else, but No," Daniel interrupted, his voice firm. "You didn't think. You knew. And you chose. Over and over again." She flinched at his words. "I can make it right," she pleaded. "I just need." "I don't owe you anything, Samantha," he said coldly. "You walked away, and I moved on." Her breath hitched. "Moved on?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Her name is Claire, and she treats me the way a wife should." Samantha felt the ground slip beneath her feet. She had thought, foolishly, that she could return to the life she had abandoned. That Daniel, kind and forgiving Daniel, would take her back. But she had underestimated the damage she had done. "You should go," he said, turning back to the door. "There's nothing for you here anymore." She wanted to fight, to argue, to make him see that she had changed. But deep down, she knew the truth. Daniel was right. She had burned the bridge between them, and now she had nowhere left to go. With no career, no money, and no one to turn to, Samantha found herself in a rundown motel, staring at the reflection of a woman she no longer recognized. The glamour was gone. replaced by dark circles under her eyes, a hollow look of loss and regret. The beautiful dresses Marco had once bought her had been sold for rent money. The lavish lifestyle she had flaunted was nothing more than a memory. She had been used, and now she was nothing. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. For a brief moment, hope flared in her chest. Maybe it was Vincent, offering one last chance. Maybe it was Marco, realizing he wanted her back. But when she picked it up, the screen was empty. No calls, no messages. No one cared anymore. Samantha let out a shuddering breath, staring at the empty screen, the silence around her suffocating. This was her reality now, and for the first time, she had no illusions left to chase. Samantha sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the wall. The weight of everything she had lost pressed down on her, suffocating her more than the stuffy, cigarette-scented air of the room. She had spent the last of her money on a week's rent, hoping she could figure out her next move before she ran out of options. But the truth was, she was out of options. Her once glamorous life had disintegrated completely. The modeling world had cast her aside like an old accessory. Marco had replaced her with someone younger and more naive, and Daniel, the one man who had truly loved her, had moved on to a woman who appreciated him. The realization burned deeper than she had anticipated. She had made her choices, had followed her desires without looking back, and now she had to live with the consequences. With her pride stripped away, she tried reaching out to anyone who might still listen. She scrolled through her phone, past the names of people who had once fawned over her beauty, past the industry contacts who had once promised her success. But there was no point in calling them. She knew they wouldn't answer. Her stomach growled. She couldn't remember the last real meal she had eaten. The lavish restaurants, the champagne-filled parties, the overflowing plates of caviar and fine steak. Those were long gone. She dug through her purse and found a few crumpled bills, barely enough for a cheap meal at the diner down the street. As she walked in, she could feel the stares. Her designer clothes, now worn and wrinkled, looked out of place here. The waitress, a woman in her late 50s with tired eyes, took her order with little interest. "You look familiar," the woman said as she set a plate of dry toast and watery coffee in front of Samantha. "I used to be a model," Samantha replied with a weak smile, expecting a flicker of recognition. The woman just shrugged. "Guess that didn't work out, huh?" Samantha's stomach twisted. She wanted to lash out, to argue, to claim that she had been someone important. But there was no point. The truth was written all over her face. She ate in silence, every bite tasteless. When she finished, she lingered for a moment, not wanting to return to the empty motel room. But there was nowhere else to go. As she stepped outside, a voice called her name. "Samantha?" She turned and saw an old acquaintance, Melissa. She was still radiant, still impeccably dressed, still everything Samantha had once aspired to be. But her expression was not one of admiration. It was pity. "Oh my God, it's been forever," Melissa said, her voice laced with faux sympathy. "How have you been?" Samantha hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Did she lie? Pretend she was still part of that world? Or did she admit the truth? "I've had some setbacks," she said cautiously. Melissa sighed, shaking her head. "Yeah, I heard. You know how this industry is. If you're not constantly rising, you're already forgotten." Samantha clenched her jaw. "I just need a break. One more chance." Melissa gave her a sad smile. "Sweetie, you had your moment. Marco moved on. Vincent's working with new faces. It's over." The words sliced through Samantha like a blade. She had already known it, but hearing it aloud made it real. Melissa gave her one last pitying glance before pulling out her phone. "Listen, I have to run, but take care of yourself, okay?" Samantha nodded numbly. watching as Melissa disappeared into a black luxury car. The world she had fought so hard to be a part of had officially left her behind. Back in her motel room, Samantha sat on the bed, gripping her phone tightly. There was one last number she hadn't called yet. One last person who might still care. Daniel. Her hands trembled as she dialed, her heart pounding as the phone rang. After 3 rings, he answered. Hello? She swallowed the lump in her throat. Daniel, it's me. Silence. She took a deep breath. I know I have no right to ask, but I have nowhere else to go. Daniel sighed. Samantha? Please, she whispered. I just need help getting back on my feet. Just for a little while. Another silence. Then, his voice, softer this time. You didn't just leave me, Samantha. You destroyed us. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I know, and I regret it every day. There was a long pause before Daniel spoke again. I can't help you. Her breath hitched. Daniel, please. I'm sorry, he said, his voice heavy, but I moved on. You need to do the same. The line went dead. Samantha stared at the phone, feeling her last thread of hope snap. She had burned every bridge, and now there was no way back. The final curtain. Days passed in a blur. The money ran out. The motel manager knocked on her door, demanding payment. With no other choice, she packed up what little she had left and walked out onto the streets. The city that had once worshipped her now felt cold and unfeeling. The billboards, once filled with her image, had been replaced with fresh new faces. The world kept moving forward, and she had been left behind. She wandered aimlessly, her reflection catching in shop windows. She barely recognized herself anymore. The woman who had once turned heads, who had once believed she was destined for greatness, was now just another lost soul in the city. As the sun set, Samantha sat on a bench, watching people pass by, businessmen, couples, aspiring young models still filled with dreams. She thought about Daniel, about the life she had thrown away. A simple, honest life with a man who had truly loved her. She had traded it all for illusions. And now, she had nothing. A cold wind blew through the streets, but she didn't move. She had nowhere to go. No one left to turn to. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone.